and take out the Chapter 12, Section 2 reading notes that you that you started in or you did in class today. Hopefully finished in class today. It has some things on the right hand side about political changes, social changes, economic changes. We're going to use this right hand side for your notes on presidential reconstruction, and then you'll have radical congressional reconstruction in your Chapter 12, Section 3 notes. So you'll have all your textbook notes on the left, and then all the class notes on the right, and all the a couple of the activities that you'll have access to either on Google Docs or in the sheet that we'll look at on Friday and into Monday. Today's video, the objective is simply to look at presidential reconstruction. We're going to consider how Andrew Johnson's personal goals and prejudices get in the way of meaningful reconstruction. By the end of this, you should be able to answer these questions. What was Johnson's plan on paper? What is it that he said he was going to do with Reconstruction? How did his plan differ in action, and why? And so where we're going to start is just by looking at, and hopefully I had a chance to show you this in class today. If not, remind me and we'll take a look at it again at the beginning of class on Friday so that you understand these dates. But what I want to highlight here is this is the Congress and when they're in session, and right here, this date, hopefully I explained this today, this is the date that explains to us the Wade Davis pocket veto, okay? And then Congress comes back into session December 5th, 1864, okay? And they are there through when it's starting to look like the war is taking a good turn through March 3rd, 1865. And that's when, right before the inauguration, second inauguration of Lincoln, they adjourn. And you'll see that one of the things that they did when they adjourn is they are not scheduled to come back until December 4th of 1865. So we have March 3rd of 1865 to December 4th of 1865. Congress will not be in session. That's significant because that means that the president is in control of the government, and he can always call Congress back, but what we'll see is Andrew Johnson does not. We know that in this meantime, March 3rd to December, right, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated, and that leaves us with Andrew Johnson. And in May of 1865, Andrew Johnson begins leading Reconstruction, and we call this presidential Reconstruction. So here's his plan on paper. Johnson's presidential proclamations. He's going to issue a couple of presidential proclamations that are meant to steer Reconstruction. Where I would start is that Johnson had the goal of having Reconstruction complete before Congress came back into session. So before December 4th, 1865, Andrew Johnson wants to have this whole thing done. Where he starts is similar to what Lincoln had said. He understands that he's going to have to create a population in the South of voters and office holders, and so he offers this presidential proclamation on pardon and amnesty. And essentially he's going to offer pardons if an oath was taken, just like Lincoln. He, however, adds some exclusions. He says that if you were a Confederate government official, you're not eligible. If you were a military officer, if you gave orders, you're not eligible. And if you were a Southerner that held more than $20,000 in property, you're not eligible. And so what Johnson was saying was that he was being very specific. Not every Southerner gets to come back. There are some Southerners who canceled their citizenship, is what he said on paper. And these are the list of people that he said did so. Radicals at home, the radical Republicans who believe in punishment, they see some punishment here. Right? There are some Southerners being held accountable for what they did. The next step on paper for Johnson was, how do we get states back? What's the future of states? And his process was going to be kind of similar to what we know in the territorial process. He was going to appoint what he called a Reconstruction governor, and that person was going to be in charge of overseeing the process. And the process was going to be as people took the oaths and got their pardons, and they were then citizens. Once there was a majority of eligible pre-war voters, they could then hold an election, elect a new state legislature, a new state constitutional convention would be held, and in that new state constitutional convention, Johnson said in his proclamation, 3 things had to be done. Number 1, you had to ratify the 13th Amendment, which meant that every southern state was going to have to say that slavery was dead. Second thing that they were going to have to do is they were going to have to declare secession illegal. They were going to have to say, secession, we couldn't do it. That was our mistake. And third, they were going to have to cancel all Confederate war debt. So if you had a white rich white Southerner who had invested in the Confederacy, they weren't going to get their money back. Right? They backed the wrong horse. In this, the radicals see some punishment, kind of like this. And so Johnson, after May, sets about implementing this plan. Now, here's the thing. If he wants to have this done by December, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is necessary to be able to declare December, let's look at that date again, December 4th, 1865. What is necessary to declare Reconstruction complete? And here in Johnson's mind, what has to be done? Number one, you can't say Reconstruction is done if you still have a military occupation of the South. They can't be whole states if you need to occupy them militarily. So the military must be out of the South. Number two, the Southern states must have completed this prescribed process and elected a congressional delegation. So they have a functioning state government. That functioning state government has done the three things. They've ratified the 13th Amendment, they have repudiated secession, and they have declared war debt void. They do those things, and then they elect a congressional delegation. They're ready to come back into the Union. So Johnson imagines himself on December 4th, 1865, walking up the steps of Congress, of the Capitol, being followed by these delegations of all the newly elected Southern congressmen, and telling Congress, I've done it. I've completed Reconstruction. And the last step would be the sitting U.S. Congress must seat or welcome those new Southern congressional delegations. And once they take their seats in Congress, they're back. Right? They're states again. And this is what Johnson sees happening by December of 1865. And here's how it actually goes. So Johnson's trying to hurry the South through this process. And what he notices is he doesn't have full participation and cooperation from the South. For example, when they first hold their elections, when they hold their very first elections, many pardoned citizens, so the eligible voters, vote for ineligible politicians. So people who held offices in the 1850s and during the Civil War who were ineligible for a pardon are reelected or elected to new state legislatures. These Reconstruction governors tell Johnson, what do we want us to do here? They're not following the rules. And his simple theory is this: if you need a pardon to hold office, and they are electing people that don't hold pardons, I have to pardon them. And so he just starts pardoning all these people that weren't even really eligible for pardons. Now imagine what the radicals think when they start to hear about this. The Southern states start to rewrite their constitutions. Now, what they do, no doubt, they ratify the 13th Amendment. They understand that slavery is dead, but they're kind of hesitant on those other demands. Several of the states refuse to say secession is impossible. Several states refuse to cancel the war debts. Despite this, Johnson was gradually withdrawing the military, which was a problem because that's the only trump card he had down there. It's the only force that he could have to say, no, you have to do things my way. Southern states then, now they have these new elected state legislatures, now they start to write new laws. And what they start to write are things called black codes, which are laws that are race specific, and they are implemented to institute an almost slave-like system in the South. The best example, and I think your book mentions this one, the best example is vagrancy laws, black code vagrancy laws, where you had to be able to provide proof of your employment, and if not, somebody could, quote unquote, employ you. Johnson just ignores these. Then the Southern states elect congressional delegations. And Johnson fully expects, as he's nearing December of 1865, that this process is complete and that he did it. He's got functioning Southern state governments, even though they aren't really what the radicals would like to see. They look a lot like they did in the 1850s, and they're passing laws that are, really making everybody question what was the Civil War all about? What was all this sacrifice for if we're going back to this system? Johnson fully expected them to be seated. And so the showdown that we're going to move into tomorrow night or over the weekend is what happens when Congress gets back. When Johnson says, hey, I have these congressional delegations, will you please seat them and Reconstruction can be complete? How committed to their cause are the radical Republicans? How much can they take on what the president had done? How long will it take to do that? Because now you're talking about a period of about 9 months after the Civil War where the Southerners have not been punished. In fact, they've been rewarded for not following the rules. There's no military presence in the South, and they have functioning state governments that are being allowed to do whatever they want to do with their former slaves. And Johnson does nothing for the freedmen. And so what I hope you are able to answer after viewing this and maybe going back and reviewing the PowerPoint if you need to is, Andrew Johnson's plan on paper looked punitive. The radicals kind of liked it. But when he puts it in action, he's in too much of a hurry and isn't willing to take the time to make sure that it's done right, primarily because he doesn't really believe in it. Johnson believes in states' rights. Johnson believes in a limited federal government, and he believes that this process just needs to go quickly so that we can get the Union back together and start moving forward. There's a Google Doc. Be sure that you go do that.